guys, I am going to be teaching you how to plant a rose bush. I just basically want to teach you everything you would ever need to know about planting a rose bush so you don't have to go to other videos and check that out. So it might be a little longer video. I have about 10 tips and advice when planting these roses. So just bear with me, be patient, and this will help you know everything you need to know when planting a new rose bush. The tip I would give you is if you order online, be very careful on how you take it out of the box. Mine came in a big old cardboard box, and I just made sure I cut around it and didn't try to pull this out, because you could pull out the whole top of this and then your rose is bye-bye. I just did that recently with the plant, a hydrangea, and I pulled off all the leaves and it just died. So it was really sad. So be careful on taking it out of a box if you order it online. Also, if you go to the nursery, it will have a label. And so just check out that label, because roses come in different sizes. There's tree roses, which get a lot bigger than mini roses. So this rose right here gets about 2.5 feet tall to 3 feet tall and wide. So it's a medium-sized rose bush. It doesn't get huge, but it's not a miniature rose that usually gets about 18 inches to 24 inches. So it's important to know what size they are, because that will play a role in where you plan on the spacing, etc. So the first tip I would give when planting this rose is very gently take it out of the container. I kind of just lean it like this, and I pull out that, and it kind of just falls out of this container. And this one right here is very loose. It's okay if some of that falls. I know this doesn't look very pretty, but it will look pretty once I plant it and those roots acclimate and start spreading and growing. So that's the first thing I would say, is be careful. And look at your roots. So right here, they're loose, they're not tight, and root bound can happen where those roots start to bind around each other. But right here, I'm going to look up closely. Those roots look okay, they're loose. And so I'm just going to kind of like spread those around in the ground, and so they can spread and establish healthy roots. So that's the first tip. Show you what parts of the rose bush there are. Right here, this is called the root ball, and you want to plant this deeper and a little bit wider than this size. So it's not going to be a very big hole for me, but if you go to the nursery, there will be, sometimes you'll buy a gallon size rose bush, and so that's going to need a lot bigger hole. And right here, you see this is called the graft union. And you want that just to be slightly deeper than the top of the soil. So it's fairly easy. So I'm going to show you how I dig that right now and put it in. Also, spacing is really important. So before I plant this rose bush, I'm going to make sure there's enough spacing. So right here I have a little bush, but I want this to be able to be about 2.5 feet tall and wide. So you want to make sure you give them enough space, because roses do not like competition, and especially with bigger bushes, they need their roots to expand and grow. So you want to make sure you plant a rose bush about 36 inches, give it about 3 feet of spacing, 36 inches wide, and if it's a tree rose, you want to give it about 3 to 5 feet width, and if it's a miniature bush, they don't need as much spacing, so maybe more like 30. Measuring tool. This is about 2.5 feet right here. So, and then right here, this is about 2.5 feet. So I'm going to plant it about right here. I have a plant right here that's recovering from transplant shock that gets about 30 feet tall and wide. So that will give enough spacing. This magnolia bush tree, I want it to get about 4 to 5 feet tall and wide. So that will give it plenty of space to grow and thrive. If they have to compete, it just won't grow as well, and it will make the rose a little bit more gangly and straggly and just not very appealing to the eye. So let's get planting. Out a little hole. It's about 3 inches deep and wide, and this rose bush is about 3 inches tall and wide, maybe a little bit less, because I need this hole to be just a little bit deeper and wider than this bush. But as you can see, as I said earlier, this is the graft union, and you want your soil to just be a little bit above that. And then the root ball will go right in there. My grafting is right there. I'm going to cover that up. My 4-year-old can do this, you can too. This is the fun part, because you know you're starting to plant something that's going to turn into something beautiful. And there's something so therapeutic about being in the dirt with your hands. Sorry, that was a little bit blurry. And there you go. That's it. I'm just going to grab my hose and I'm just going to give it a deep soaking right around the corner. Give it about, let it soak in about 4 to 5 inches. So right now I'm planting this rose in our hot 90-degree weather. So I'm just gonna let that soak in. The soil might start to settle a little bit as it comes down, and then I'll just fill it with a little bit more top soil. Just gently press it down that second time as the other soil starts to settle. But when it's really, really hot, it's gonna need more watering, especially when they're newly established. So this little 4-inch plant doesn't have roots that are established yet, so it's gonna dry up quickly. On this hot weather, I'm going to give it a fairly deep soaking 2 to 3 times a week. And then when it becomes more established, I only need to water it about once a week. And in the springtime, you don't really need to water them when they're more established. At the most, maybe once every 2 weeks. Roses need well-drained soil. They cannot stand standing water. The roots will rot, and that's just no good. So make sure you have well-drained soil. They're pretty good in most soil types. But just like I said, if it's really hot, it's going to need more watering. Look at your bush. If it's looking a little wilty, water it more. Everyone's in different climates, temperatures, so I can't say exactly how much water your rose bush will need, but here in this hot temperature, I'm going to water this about 2 to 3 times a week. Next year when it's established, it might only need a deep watering for once a week in the hot temperatures. Also, the bigger the rose bush, the more water, the smaller, the less water. So anyway, to add an important part of knowing if you're watering your rose bushes enough is check your soil. So if you put your finger in and 2 to 3 inches deep it is bone dry, then you know it needs water. If it's still moist, wait another 2 to 3 days, and if it starts to dry out, then you need water. So touch your soil. If it's moist, you're good. If it's dry now, add some water. Really stressed out about watering too much or underwatering, I would err on the side of underwatering because you don't want to get root rot. They don't really recover from root rot, but they can recover from drying out. So things I want to talk about is deadheading your roses, how much sun they need, and a little bit about pruning. So roses really love sun. They're sun-loving perennials, so you want to make sure you give them an area where they get about at least 6 hours of full sun. And if you live in the hotter climates, they can get by with 4 hours of afternoon hotter sun. If you're in a more temperate climate, I wouldn't risk it, and I would just do 6 hours of full sun. So just give them as much sun as you can, which basically means they're not shaded, they're not dappily shaded, partial shaded, they're just getting all that sunlight throughout the day. And also, deadheading is important. You don't have to do them, your roses will be fine. So if you're kind of lazy and you don't have the time to come out and kill off these dead blooms. So deadheading is basically when this blossom has bloomed and faded and died off, you just come in and you cut it off right there. So you just cut off all those spent blooms, those dead blooms, and then that will promote new growth, newer, healthier growth, and promote new blossoms and more abundantly. So that's basically why you do it. And roses are awesome that way. They have blossoms from summer all the way until fall. And I think that's the fun part. I like deadheading. It doesn't take much effort and it's just satisfying. And then pruning. Well, pruning is going to be hard to show you because I do that in spring. I am going to do a video in spring where I'm pruning my roses. But you prune your roses in early spring before any of the leaves are starting to come out or any of that foliage, because you can kind of see what you're working with. And you can cut down your rose bushes by about 1/3 to 1/2 depending on what size you want. So you can kind of control the size depending on your pruning. But that happens in early spring. And basically, you just want to prune out any dead wood, any weak stems that are kind of going inward, or you kind of just want to keep a lot of sunlight inside so that the sun can focus on producing beautiful blooms and healthy stems and plants. So those are the last tips I would give you. And rose bush, just give it some time for it to grow new leaves. You might not see much for a little bit. Those roots are just taking some time to acclimate, establish, and grow, and then you'll see some new leaves pop out. If you don't see any after a while, then it's possible you got root rot, which means those roots got too much water and they started dying off. But that's hard to do in this hot climate. Just make sure you water it enough. And if you like this video, if you have any other questions that I haven't covered, comment down below and I'll respond to you. Like and subscribe. Talk to you later. Have a wonderful day gardening. Bye.